This video contains elements that are not suitable for children under the age of 14. Viewer discretion is advised.
You have no idea how long I've waited for this. 2012 marked the end of several things for Thomas and Friends. For one, Michael Angelis and Michael Brandon would retire from their roles as narrators for the show for the United Kingdom and the United States, respectively. In the former's case, he was the longest-serving English-speaking narrator, starting with Series 3 in 1991, lasting all the way up to Series 16, a period of 21 years, which is real dedication. I could have mentioned that in the last episode, but I was just feeling a little sick from, well, you know. But anyway, I introduced Angelis with this clip that appears a lot whenever Gondorf discusses him, so it's only fair that I outroduce... Wait, outroduce?
It's not even a word. You're losing your mind.
It's only fair that I send Michael Angelis off the same way I introduced him, just to bring things full circle.
His name's Nigel. Dr. Nigel Botterill. I'll get you the details.
And as I'm sure you all know, he died of heart attack on May 30th, 2020 at the age of 76. Often overlooked, Angelis will never be forgotten, so rest in peace, Sergeant Donnelly. As for Michael Brandon, he more or less carried on with his acting career and is still active to this day. Both of them bowed out with Blue Mountain Mystery, not only the best special from the Nitrogen era, but also ended it on more or less a high note, unlike Series 16. Oh, and as a side note, and I can't believe I didn't bring this up earlier, Nitrogen Studios also made a promotional poster for The Adventures of Thomas, a planned live-action/CGI film with animation done by Weta Digital and directed by Shane Acker, with a script by Josh Klausner, Will McRobb, and Chris Viscardi. It would have taken place during World War II and revolved around a young boy and his father rebonding on Sodor, if there would have been a Steam versus Diesel conflict. Basically, Magic Railroad 2.0. Considering the state of the show at the time, the script was completed in 2010, not to mention the reputation of other projects done by the director and writers, we probably didn't miss anything. Given how little had been done with The Adventures of Thomas, looking back, it almost feels like it was a publicity stunt to gain interest in the brand. Honestly, if you wanted this plot done right, I recommend watching the 2018 movie, Christopher Robin. More or less the same plot, but better. Oh, and I would also like to mention that the guy behind the movie, Mark Forster, has his own Thomas movie in production, as far as we know. But that's a story for another day. Hopefully. Anyway, let's get back to the show. The animation was originally going to be taken over by Guru Studios, also based in Canada, but Roy Productions took the reins instead, beginning with the special King of the Railway. I remember back when the first trailers were released, people went nuts over them, thinking I was going to crash and burn, only to be silenced when the special actually turned out to be pretty good, marking the beginning of a new era of quality storytelling for the Thomas brand under Mattel. So that leads me on to Series 17. So many people sang its praises when it first came out, as did I, but looking back on Series 17, it hasn't aged for me as well as I'd thought. I do think it's a good series, don't get me wrong, but it did have some duds and a few episodes that are just painfully average. Steamy Stafford, the first episode produced for this series, did feel a bit like a Miller episode, only not as annoying. If there was actually an attempt to teach kids something, if kids can gain something out of this episode, then that's probably more than what I could ever say, so I can't be too harsh. Scruff's Makeover and the Afternoon Tea Express are painfully average at best, and the missing Christmas decorations, while it has something of a purpose in giving Sydney his new wheels, they could have focused on the Diesels doing so rather than make Diesel 10 Sodor equivalent to the Grinch. It's also his last appearance to date, barring Pinchy appearing in the fancy sequence to What Rebecca Does, but that doesn't really count. Since then, Diesel 10 has become a merch-only character like the Logging Locos, with a possible explanation being that the writers of Mattel thought him to be too scary for the target audience. I don't know why, since the point of a villain is to be scary, but still. But probably the weakest episode out of this series was the Frozen Turntable, which puts too much emphasis on Gordon's selfishness rather than showing the consequences of it as well. We could have seen James taking the express and then Gordon taking the mail train as punishment, but nope. With all that being said, it was nice that they gave focus on characters introduced in the Nitrogen era, even attempting to make them more appealing in terms of personality. Paxton is probably my favorite out of the bunch. He's a bit dopey and gullible, but he's also pretty loyal to his friends, and even knows when to draw the line. Sydney wasn't too bad either, even providing a few good laughs with how forgetful he is. Norman, however, still hasn't done a damn thing, and I still feel like they could have brought in Dennis instead. Finally, there's Luke, who's very much the little brother of the Scarloy Railway Railway. His backstory was pretty sad, and he even feels guilty for thinking he got Victor scrapped, but thankfully that wasn't the case, and since then, he's become a bit more social with the other engines. This is further affirmed in Luke's new friend when he befriends a deer and tries to make it feel more comfortable at the Blue Mountain Quarry, only to understand that it's better off in a more open environment. Oh, I swear, that ending could get to anyone. So what can I say about the newbies from King of the Railway? Connor and Caitlin didn't have much to do, although the latter had a great leading role in Calm Down Caitlin, and the former was a good foil to Bill and Ben, falling for their tricks. Not my most favorite characters, but I do lean to Caitlin more. I almost wonder what it'd be like if she and Rebecca were ever to meet. The Ulfstead Castle trio are significantly stronger. Again, Millie didn't have much to do in Series 17, barring the switch, but she has since gone on to show that she's not just a pretty face and will get back at you if you get on her bad side. The Earl of Sodor, Sir Robert Norby, is a show stealer whenever he's on screen. Don't let his age fool you. He's just as lively as the next person, and very bold and eccentric when it comes to his ideas. He's even made a dinosaur park and even planned a railway museum. Makes you wonder how rich Sir Robert is. But for me personally, Stephen is the best of the bunch. Again, might be an old engine, but he's still jolly and has a solid sense of humor, and will take nonsense from anyone like Spencer or Diesel. Lastly, there's also the other newbie for Series 17, Porter. He had a very positive mindset in this series, unafraid to ask for help, never letting insults get to him. We could do more with people like him, but sadly, since Tale of the Brave, Porter's barely had anything to do, and he's almost always overshadowed by Cranky and Salty, which makes you wonder why he's even there. I mean, he does literally nothing in Salty All at Sea in Series 19, the one episode where we could have delved more into their relationship. But no, we had to feature Thomas because Thomas. For this new era of Thomas, in addition to a new writing team and a new animation studio, they brought in a new narrator too for both the United Kingdom and the United States. Enter British actor-singer Mark Morahan, and like Ringo Starr and Michelangelos before him, he was born in Liverpool, continuing to maintain Thomas's Liverpudlian roots. I feel Mark was overused slightly in Series 17, but from Series 18 up to the 21st, he only narrated whenever the scene called for it, making his narration all the better to appreciate, and he made every line count. When I heard his narration for the first time, I was very surprised they brought in a new narrator, but I also thought he did a great job too. It was very sad to learn that Mark would stop narrating the show after Series 21, but he still stayed with the brand, such as voicing Dexter for School of Duck, playing Mr. Evans for Storytime segments, and even narrated some stories for the podcast Thomas and Friends Storytime, so at least Mark is still involved in some way. Oh, and in case you were wondering, with Michael Brannon's departure, his role as Diesel in the American dub was taken over by Martin Sherman, who also voiced Thomas and Percy until Series 18 when he left the show in favor of Joseph May and Christopher Ragland, respectively. For Series 19 onward, Carrie Shale would voice Diesel for both English dubs. Series 17 was directed solely by David Boss, with Robert Anderson serving as producer alongside Ian McHugh and Hallam Jabor. For both King of the Railway and Tale of the Brave, they were directed by Rob Silvestri, meaning that the episodes and specials were done by different teams, which was a good strategy since it means less pressure on both sides, and it would remain that way up to Series 24. Of course, Andrew Brenner took over as head writer, and even brought back Thomas veterans Paul Larson and Lee Pressman onto the writing staff. Larson would co-write episodes with Laura Beaumont, and they left after Series 18, most likely to work on other hit and Mattel-owned shows before returning once again for Series 24. Pressman would skip over Series 18, but he remained on the writing staff all the way up to Series 22. The only other newbie on the writing staff was Davey Moore, who would stick with Thomas all the way up to Series 24, matching Sharon Miller by having written for 8 consecutive series, although she would remain with the show as voice director, which is probably her greatest contribution to the brand, a few gems during her tenure notwithstanding as a writer. You have to wonder what might have happened if she'd been given that position from day one. For the first time since Series 5, Hit and Mattel brought in a railway consultant, fellow AFOT, that is, adult fan of Thomas, Sam Wilkinson, who made some suggestions like giving every engine a lamp, the creation of Glenn the Coffee Pot engine, and even providing some additional writing material for King of the Railway, The Adventure Begins, and Emily Saves the World. Another AFOT, Sean O'Connor of Soda Island 3D, even helped to partially design Harold's flatbed in the Thomas way, although rather recently, the reputations in the Thomas community have been rather questionable, and that's as far as I'm willing to discuss it here. Initially, Series 17 was going to have a run of 20 episodes like the 5 series before it, but the episodes from Spills and Frills ended up becoming part of the running, reverting back to the classic 26 episode run. The episodes were also released in blocks, such as the first 10 episodes airing in June 2013, a further 5 episodes between September 30th and October 4th, 2 mini fire engines on November 5th for Guy Fawkes Night, the 4 winter episodes on the week of Christmas, and finally the Spills and Frills episodes on DVD in March 2014, although they eventually aired on TV in July and November that same year. For both Series 17 and 18, the opening titles and closing credits animated by Nitrogen were reused, but they weren't credited for it. It wouldn't be until Series 19 that they would be redone along with the engine roll call. For Brenner & Co.'s first series, it's pretty clear that they had to get out of a really bad time for the show, so not everything was going to transform overnight. The animation looks rather poor compared to what Art Productions and later Jamfield Productions would bring out, and the writing for the first few episodes when it came to production were pretty slow-paced. If while Robert Harshorn's music was good, it still seems generic and fades into the background, making it easy to forget. However, it was nice that they brought back Duck, Bill and Ben and Harvey, with the latter feeling very left field and unexpected, and it does have a few episodes that could almost be called modern classics, such as Bill or Ben and Thomas's Shortcut. While not that great compared to later series down the line, Series 17 is still a good series nonetheless. Like the ice cream that comes out to Raton Selectable after putting up with a decade of crap writing, for now, the fans could finally open the shed doors and say, "Welcome home, Thomas."
And welcome home, Season 7, Emily.
What the, Matt? Fine. Say what you want about Emily, since I know that's what you want to do.
Thank you! Now then, I'd like you all to know that thanks to Season 8, I hated Emily for a really, really long time. Beginning with Season 13, or Hero of the Rails, I started to warm back up to her a bit. But thanks to a number of questionable episode choices for her in Seasons 14 to 16, I only became neutral towards Emily. With Season 17, however, yes, this is the season that got me fully liking Emily again. As Zack mentioned, No Snow for Thomas is basically Thomas, Emily, and the snowplow, but 100 times better! It portrayed Emily how she's supposed to be like.
Thomas was very surprised.
But they're my coaches. That's my job.
You can't go out today, Thomas. Not without your snowplow.
I hid my snowplow, and now I can't find it anywhere.
That's why we've been looking for you. We found your snowplow buried in the snow.
Thank you, Emily. Sorry, sir.
Thomas, where's your snowplow?
I can't find it. If it snows, I'll just have to go out without it.
But Emily was having a great time now.
Yay!
She was having so much fun. She cleared the tracks in no time.
Tomorrow you can clear the tracks for Emily.
But before that, I've got something to show you. Follow me.
Overall, this episode makes me so happy that I could just... Okay, I'm done.
Wait, did you just squeal like a girl?
What?
I took offense to that, Zack.
Oh, sorry. Anyway, Series 17 set the new era off to a good start, but where would the next 7 seasons lead off? Don't worry, folks, the night is still young. King of the Railway and Series 17 each turned out to be a surprise hit, so could Andrew Brenner & Co. live up to their promises and step up their A game for the 30th anniversary of the TV series? Well, they did bring forth Tale of the Brave at the start of September 2014, a heartwarming story about friendship and bravery. And while there were people who loved it, there were also people who didn't like it for rather nitpicky reasons, most likely due to the lack of returning characters. In retrospect, that should have been a red flag toward the fandom's behavior that we're seeing today. But then we got Series 18, which would go on to prove that Series 17 wasn't just a lucky break after the Nitrogen era. There was a continuing talent behind the writing staff that built a large railway station on the foundations that the previous series had left behind. I don't even know where to begin. I mean, I could go on about how many great episodes Series 18 had. Old Reliable Edward, Thomas the Quarry Engine, No Steam Without Coal, Not So Slow Coaches, Last Train for Christmas, and my favorite episode out of his series, Duncan and the Grumpy Passenger. That episode, in retrospect, is the perfect metaphor for the Thomas fandom in the form of the titular Grumpy Passenger himself. Not to mention how relatable this episode and its moral are on a spiritual level.
If you try to please every pony, you oftentimes end up pleasing no pony, especially yourself.
And that's more or less what happened here. Duncan tried very hard to stop the grumpy passenger from his constant complaining, yet his decisions ended up making all of his passengers complain, including the grumpy one. On top of that, the animation in both Duncan episodes was absolutely gorgeous, especially this scene from Duncan the Humbug. Just look at it. It looks like it was taken out of a painting. Yeah, the team at Art Productions were really stepping up their game since Series 17 and King of the Railway, with the animation quality reaching its peak by Legend of a Lost Treasure in Series 20. While many were pleased to see Duncan return to CGI, they also weren't too thrilled that he looked out of proportion compared to his real-life basis Douglas, as I explained in the Series 16 review. Yeah, Duncan does look like a toy, but for me, as long as it resembles the character in some way, that's all that really matters. The same applies to Oliver when he returned along with Toad the Brake Van. Again, fans have complained that Oliver looks too small, but for me, I could care less. I can overlook a poor-ish looking vendor as long as they're well written. I have this mindset that bland visuals can be salvaged by a great story, but it doesn't work the other way around. You would think that with Duck, Oliver, and Toad back in the series, fans would be pleased that they're returning, right? A good number were pleased, yes, but sadly, whenever the Great Western Duo turned up, probably the most infamous example being Spencer's VIP, another good number of fans also started to act rather picky and entitled, even going so far to accuse the appearances of Duck and Oliver as being fan service. Let's not forget that they were the same fans who complained during Series 8 through 16, barring the 12th, but they didn't turn up at all. Come on, people, do you want them back or not? Make up your damn minds. But then again, this is the Thomas fandom we're talking about, where double standards are stockpiled like Welsh coal. Yes, I'm aware that not everybody in the fandom is like that, but do I even need to bring up what I said about consistency in my Series 5 retrospective again? Oh, and speaking of fan service, I'd probably bring this up, and I imagine that I'll be slaughtered by fans for doing so, never mind the fact that I'd still be slaughtered for not bringing it up, so I'm screwed either way. This right there, folks, is a prime example of everything going so brilliantly, but at the very last second, almost literally in this instance, fans get pissed off. It's safe to say that Emily was rather unpopular during Series 8 through 12, or 8 through 16, depending on who you are, not only because of her unnecessary personality change back then, but mostly because of her replacing, and I use that term loosely, mind you, Duck. I'm not going to go into that again as I've already done so for Series 8, but by that point, fans were slowly warming up to Emily again, and that was one scene which pretty much blew up the fandom for at least a few weeks. And rather regrettably, I too was guilty of it. While I was glad that Duck returned to the show back in 2013, for the next couple of years, fans just wouldn't stop going on about him as if he was the greatest thing since Welsh coal, and it reached a point that I ended up resenting him. Yeah, this is why we can't have nice things, folks. Since then, now that it's cooled off, sort of, I've pretty much let go of my frustrations for that scene, but I still don't like how it played out. It would have made much better sense had James been the one left out of Ted Rochette's The End and Emily got his birth, but instead the writers decided to pander to the fandom with kids, the actual target audience, not understanding the context behind it. This kind of entitlement would eventually come back to bite the fandom in the ass the big way in 2017 when Mattel stopped listening to the older fans because they got too greedy, and this helped lead the show to where it is today while also intensifying the backlash towards Mattel.
I really had expected better of you people. So thanks. Thanks for nothing.
You're welcome.
So yeah, both Mattel and the fans are at fault. As for the other episodes, we had an episode serving as an interquel to Tale of the Brave with Toad's bright idea, showing what Gator and Toad had been up to on the night of James's Flying Kipper run. It did have some plot holes like Percy and Gator suddenly going on different routes after seeing James derail, but it was still a nice little experiment and it shows what I like about Davey Moore as a writer. His greatest strength lies in character interactions. Gator and Toad played off one another really well. As mentioned before, the episodes on the DVD Spills and Frills were intended to be part of Series 18, but they were pushed forward to Series 17 instead, meaning that the episodes on Dials and Discoveries, which were going to be a part of Series 19, ended up on Series 18 instead. Yet, strangely, those episodes ended up being part of Series 19 when it aired on television. If we were to continue this pattern, that would mean that Start Your Engines was going to be a part of Series 20, and Extraordinary Engines and the Glenn Duology were going to be part of Series 21, and the latter two episodes are part of the complete Series 21 on Amazon Prime in the UK. With Spills and Frills becoming part of Series 17, it's no wonder Series 21 got cut short, and fast-tracking The Adventure Begins into the production schedule didn't help either, but more on that next time. For the first time in the show, after having a face in Thomas and Victoria, Henrietta finally gained a permanent face for Series 18, making you wonder why it didn't do so from day one, but still, it was a fantastic decision by the team, giving Toby more to work with, almost making him and Henrietta the railway equivalent to a married couple. Maggie Aldenshaw's voice performance as Henrietta really completes the character. Speaking of celebrity voices, we had two from Tale the Brave returning for Series 18, Clive Mantle as Gator and Olivia Colman as Marion. I'll start off with Gator since both the special and this series were the only times he ever appeared in the show. I really loved his character back then, and I still do to this day. Clive's performance adds a bit of warmth to Gator's character, and his friendship with Percy was one of the best of the entire franchise, something they tried to replicate 2 years later with Thomas and Ashima in The Great Race, and failed to see what made it work. We also know enough about Gator to understand who he is. He has a fear of heights, but when he sees Percy cross the soda suspension bridge without hesitation, Gator decides to follow his lead and cross it himself. It's a very heartwarming scene from the special. On the humorous side of things, there's Marion the Steam Shovel. Sharon Miller and Olivia Colman knew how to ham up her performance, and Olivia steals every scene she's in, from her debut in Tale the Brave all the way up to what Rebecca does in Series 22. Marion did return in Emily's Best Friend for Series 24, but by the time that series had entered production, Olivia was most likely busy attending the Oscars, so Marion was voiced by Lucy Montgomery instead, but honestly I think it's hard to tell the difference. Lucy's impression is pretty spot on.
Oh, well, that sounds great, but I'm just so busy I don't think I can. I'll see you at the unveiling later, though. Best friend.
Oh, they finished off the digging, Toby, but I did all the hard work. Scientists only have teeny tiny little shovels. They can't do the real digging, not like me. I'm a professional.
Marion is also one of the most three-dimensional characters in this series. She's chatty, clumsy, playful, and a bit absent-minded, but at the same time, Marion knows when to be stern when Bill and Ben cause trouble and make fun of Timothy. And speaking of whom, Timothy is probably the least interesting out of the 2014 newbies, even more so than Porter. Timothy seems to work best when it comes to Bill and Ben's antics, but even then, there's only so far he can take it as he's barely evolved that much as a character. I'm not saying that Timothy is a bad character, but it says a lot that Reg, someone who's stuck at Croc's scrapyard, brings out a lot more in terms of character. I mean, seriously, who would have thought that going there would be a bit more cheerful with someone as lively as Reg? It's almost contagious if you're not careful. Finally, we come to Samson, the cabless tank engine. He started off pretty good in Samson at Your Service, frustrated that everyone wouldn't stop reminding him about getting lost on his way to Ulfstead Castle, but learned that it's okay to ask for help. But then they threw all that out the window and Samson sent for scrap, the worst episode of Series 18, which makes Samson less proud and stubborn and more like an idiot who can't tell a pile of scrap from a car with a flat tire. And you would think after the introduction of Bradford in Series 20, they would do more with Samson and make him more likable, but nope. He still acted stupid in Saving Time, one of the most boring episodes of the Brenner Era. He got better with Samson and the fireworks in Series 22, but by that point, with it being his last appearance, it was simply too little too late. The first 10 episodes of Series 18 were directed by David Stoughton, while the remaining 16 were done by Don Spencer. For Series 19, Stoughton and Spencer would co-direct 3 episodes with Diana Basso, who would later take over as full-time director of the Series 24. Meanwhile, Stoughton would direct the feature-length specials from 2015 to 2018 before finally becoming the new head writer for Steam Team to the Rescue and Series 24. Spencer would end up directing The Adventure Begins and 18 other episodes from Series Series 19, a few of them jointly with Diana Basso, as well as the 4D attraction Bubbling Boilers prior to his departure from ARC in May 2015, the same month that Thomas celebrated his 70th anniversary. Series 18 marked the departure of Martin Sherman and Ben Small as the voice of Thomas for the United States and United Kingdom, respectively. In the former's case, it was because of contractual disagreements with the production team, even announcing his departure through the SIF blog in July 2014, where he had talked about feeling exploited and even complained about the low wage he was being paid. That same month, Hit Entertainment had threatened legal action against him unless the post was removed, and in an interview with The Guardian, Martin said that he felt bullied into silence, even hoping to seek legal advice concerning the post. Hit did not comment on the matter hand, even wishing him the best in future endeavors like a brief role in Doctor Who. But as for Ben Small, his contract was not renewed, as the executives wanted a fresh voice for Thomas. Who ended up voicing Thomas for both dubs starting with Series 19? I shall reveal the answer in the next episode. Series 17 was fine, but looking back, rather dated in some areas. Series 18, however, greatly improved on it and brought forth some of the best episodes of the show at the time. If it hadn't been for Samson sent for scrap, this series would have easily been on par with Series 2 and 3 at least, but as it is, it's a notch below Series 1. I don't know what else to say other than it's a really good series that still holds up 6 years later. But since we're now 3/4 of the way through, how are the next 6 series going to compare? That is what we shall find out soon enough. "2015 was a big year for the franchise. It was the 70th anniversary of the publication of the first book, and Mattel was making it a huge deal by putting out a retelling of the first few episodes of Series 1, a 44-minute special known as The Adventure Begins. Fans were wildly positive towards it, and well, I'll save my history with it for another day. I will get to the specials at a later date so I can elaborate further, so I can talk about it then, but I will say for right now that fast-tracking The Adventure Begins into our production schedule had a serious effect on the next 3 series, with the 21st being cut short to make way for a certain rebranding that we'll get to later. Meanwhile, later in 2015, Mattel also put out what many have called to be Thomas's biggest and possibly his greatest adventure with Soto's Legend of the Lost Treasure. The reception to that was so positive that it became an example of a tough act to follow. But what about the actual show itself? With how much Series 18 had improved over 17, Series 19 had a lot to live up to, and well, the reactions toward this series were rather mixed, to say the least. There were still plenty of good episodes, some of which I'd even call among the best the show had ever put out. But Series 19 had episodes which, at best, were pretty average, and at worst, were pretty bad. So what went wrong with Series 19? Was it as bad as fans said it was? Or were the claims that it was one of the worst of the show exaggerated? Well, the first point in contention is how abysmal the distribution of episodes was. Going by the UK release dates, 4 episodes premiered in September 2015, a further 3 came out January 2016, followed by 5 more episodes in March, followed up by the episodes for Start Your Engines in July, Diesel's Ghostly Christmas on December 26, for some reason, and finally concluding with the episodes from Full Steam to the Rescue in March 2017. So all in all, it took 18 months to air Series 19. And during that time, nearly half of Series 20 had aired on British television. Meanwhile, the other half had aired in June and July, and they didn't air the Glendulogy until September 2017. Seriously, they could put out Series 17, 18, and 20 each within 1 year in the UK, including episodes that were previously released on DVD, yet Series 19, when I was to mark the 70th anniversary, got put out in drips and drabs over 2 years? There is no excuse for putting out new content this inconsistently, especially when it aired early in countries like Japan. But is it really the fault of poor distribution that made fans frustrated with Series 19? No, I don't think it's fair to say that, and mind you, that is the least of the problems this series faces. But for now, let's talk about some of the changes made starting with this series, shall we? The changes are pretty immediate with the intro. Rather than just showing Thomas puff past the windmill, the watermill, and under a bridge, we see a lot more variety with clips from Series 17 to 19, 19, featuring the Friends along with Thomas himself. The show is called Thomas and Friends after all, so what better way to showcase that in the intro? They even did a remix of the engine roll call, which I think is a lot better than the original. The last time it would be remixed was in Series 22, slightly altering a few lines to accommodate the arrival of Nia and Rebecca, although it does sound a bit awkward. The animation for the episodes is also a lot brighter and feels more natural. We got to see that in action with The Adventure Begins and Lost Treasure, and Series 19 does a great job in showing it off. Some of the sweeping shots are among ARC's best. Starting with 5 episodes that were featured on Full Steam to the Rescue, Diana Basso would take over as full-time director and would stay in that role until the first half of Series 24, when Ian Cherry took over. And now I get to reveal who takes over Thomas's voice in both English dubs. Joseph May voices him in the American dub, and personally, I find him to be the worst out of the people who voice Thomas officially. I don't think he's a bad person or actor, but whenever he voices Thomas, it just comes off as forced and disinterested at worst. It's one of the worst voices for the American dub, along with William Hope as Edward and Toby and Carrie Shale as Henry. Please do not get me started on any of them. None of them suit the characters at all if you ask me, but of course if you like them as those respective characters, then that's fine.
Zach?
Oh, hey Mike. Can you share your thoughts on the new Thomas voices?
Are you a mind reader or something?
No, I just had a hunch you would.
Okay, so we'll start with the UK dub. I've made it no secret that I am not a fan of Ben Small's Thomas voice. Like, at all. I know there are people who like them, and good for them, but for me, I've been holding this back for the longest time. I just can't stand it. It ruined any chance of me tolerating the UK dub of Series 13 through 18. Even when the episodes are good, it's still painful. He sounds like a 5-year-old after breathing helium.
Of course, Stafford. We'll teach you to chuff and puff. Just follow us, and you'll sound like a steamy in no time.
Just, no! He's not supposed to sound like that, guys. Ugh. So, what do I think of John Hassler? Well, I found him to be surprisingly enjoyable. As far as I'm concerned, after they hired him in The Adventure Begins, as well as Rob Rackstraw in Series 19, the UK dub did get better, for the most part. In the US, Joseph May took over voicing Thomas starting November 2014 with a promotional video for the Thomas-shaped balloon in Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. Last time we saw the balloon was in 2016, but Joseph still carried on. And here's a fun fact for you guys. Joseph was actually born in the same town that Thomas's class, the E2s, were based at. That has literally nothing to do with anything, but I still wanted to bring it up here. But which of the two do I like more? Honestly, I couldn't tell you. Each of them have their flaws, but they're still great at voicing him. I'm pretty sure there's a term for this, but I'm gonna call it the Ringo Starr George Carlin effect. John does some bits better than Joseph does some bits better than John. Depends on the episode, really.
I didn't know of this as I was writing the script for this review, but from what's been recently revealed, David Menken, who voiced Porter and Jack for the American dub, was offered the role of Thomas there, but he declined in support of Martin Sherman after the latter had asked him not to. That sounded rather dickish if you ask me, although in retrospect, Martin apologized for that and even said that David would have done well as a replacement voice for Thomas. Who knows what might have happened if he did accept the role. Anyway, as Mike mentioned, John Hassler took over for the British dub, and from his first lines as Thomas in The Adventure Begins, he actually seemed to get the character. I may be biased on that front, but the CGI series is really at its best with the UK dub, while the US dub is more hit or miss at best depending on who you ask. Among the other voice actors who joined May and Hassler included Christopher Ragland and Nigel Pilkington as Percy for America and England respectively, and Rob Rackstraw as James for America and Toby for England, both of which I feel are the best voices for each of them in the CGI series. With that being said, I do feel Toby's best voice came from Colm Feore in Thomas and the Magic Railroad.
I'm sorry, you two. Diesel heard every word you said. I'm going after him to see what he does next. You'd better carry on and get the mail delivered.
Oh, you're very brave, Toby.
Oh, Diesel won't bother with an old engine like me. He thinks I'm really useless.
Oh, and speaking of that movie, Rainbow Sun Productions held a recorded reading of Thomas and the Magic Railroad for the movie's 20th anniversary celebration, and Rob read for James using his US voice. Keith Wickham also took part in that reading for two of his characters, Gordon and Sir Topham Hatt. But back to Series 19, you're probably wondering what I have to say about the episodes for this season, and to answer that question, let's look back at the previous two for a moment. Series 17 was a bit laid back, allowing Brenner and Co. to find their footing as it progressed. Series 18 took on more chances and had stronger writing for the most part. But Series 19, the best way I could describe the writing for it is experimental and interesting, to say the least. Series 19 has some of the very best episodes out of the Brenner era, possibly the entire show. It's got some very Audrey-like stories such as Thomas the Babysitter, Very Important Sheep, and Lost Property. And then they have episodes which take bigger risks such as Toad and the Whale, Slow Steven, and Best Engine Ever, which is my favorite episode of not only the Brenner era, but the entire show period. But then again, Series 19 did have some real stinkers. I was never a fan of Henry Spot's Trouble, largely due to how over-the-top Henry's worrisome personality was. Thankfully, Series 20 did away with that altogether. But in light of a pandemic that's been going on for over a year, this episode just comes off as even harsher to revisit. Australia even banned it for supposedly going for an anti-vaccine message.
Even for people, chickenpox is nothing to be scared of, Henry. Most people get it when they're young and get better very quickly.
Rachel, you're from Australia. What would you say to that?
I'm actually a bit shocked that of all episodes, that was the one that was removed. I don't get how that line is supposed to be an anti-vaccine message. I found the episode bad, but not horrible by any means. It definitely needs a rewrite, though. Not exactly sure where to start. Feel free to share any ideas you have in the comments, guys.
Another bad episode from Series 19 is The Other Side of the Mountain, which is literally Thomas's Shortcut all over again, only crueler against Thomas and with one of the most ridiculous crashes of the entire show, not in a good way. The worst episode of his series, however, is Rocky Rescue. Not only does it throw a lot of continuity out the window, it also makes the rescue team look like incompetent idiots. Yeah, it's even worse than Fiery Flynn and Race to the Rescue. At least in those episodes, it was only Flynn who suffered, but Rocky Rescue? By this point, Toad and the Whale and Wild Water Rescue had come out, and in the latter, they had performed 1,000 rescues, possibly as a group and or individuals, or a combination of both. That is probably the biggest issue with Series 19. Continuity and consistency are all over the place, making it hard to tell if the show wants to be episodic or not. And given that it was in production starting in 2013, around the time that Mattel had full control over the brand, it's very likely that the behind the scenes for Series 19 were complicated to say the least. Among them being that Thomas was present in every episode, likely to celebrate the 70th anniversary, with one of the bigger offenders being Salty All at Sea, as I mentioned 2 seasons ago. Instead of Porter trying to understand Salty's fear of traveling by sea, it's Thomas because parents won't be happy if Thomas isn't on screen for 1 millisecond and kids don't relate to everyone else. That's a very shallow approach that Mattel had taken there, and trust me when I say it gets worse over the next few series. For the first time, in the TV series at least, we had a 2-part episode with Diesel's Ghostly Christmas, which is one of the laziest, most predictable episodes of the show. If you've seen at least one adaptation of A Christmas Carol, then you've already seen this episode. It's not the worst Christmas-themed episode in this series, but it is the least original. If you like it though, that's fine. But anyway, Diesel's Ghostly Christmas, because it's a 2-part episode, has a situation most unique to it. In America, it's 1 whole episode, while in the United Kingdom, it's 2 episodes. So depending on where you're from, Series 19 has either 25 or 26 episodes. In the latter country, the show had stopped airing on Nick Jr. because it had moved to Cartoonito for paid television broadcast. Series 19 marked the introduction of Philip the Diesel Box Cab, and from the get-go, he was a divisive character. But me, I like him. I know a lot of people go on about him being too childlike, but let's not forget that it's a children's show. Audrey once said that his engines were like children, so why should Philip be lambasted for following that mentality? He started off okay in Series 19, but it was later to show that he actually started to shine if Toby's new friend is anything to go by, and looking back, we really should have seen what was to come with Series 21 from a mile away, especially with this line.
Oh, we really must find that little Diesel another shed to sleep in.
Yeah, give it a year or 2, as Edward would put it.
Reminds me of a little tank engine who wanted to see the world.
But I'll delve more into that when I get to Series 21. For Series 20, I'll be giving my thoughts on Ryan, Skip, and the Arlesdale trio since they had episodes there. Speaking of which, Series 19 chronologically takes place prior to Soda's Legend of the Lost Treasure, meaning it's the only series series out of the Brenner Era to not follow up on a special, which makes the release schedule feel very confusing. We had to wait an entire year for the Lost Treasure newbies to get episodes, and by then, kids will most likely have lost interest due to the release of The Great Race, and none of the newbies from there would appear in the show proper until the Big World Big Adventures revamp. Here's how the timeline should actually play out. Series 19 was the last to have Robert and Peter Hartshorn as the show's music composers due to their contracts ending after Lost Treasure, and I think it's safe to say that they went out big. For Series 20 onward, Chris Renshaw would take over as composer and would retain that position up to Series 24. It's safe to say overall that Series 19 has a pretty divisive reputation. There are defenders who find it a fun experimental series, and there's detractors calling it out for inconsistencies. And rewatching the episodes for myself, I can see both sides of the argument. Had it not been for the likes of Other Side of the Mountain and Rocky Rescue, then I think Series 19 would have been on par with 17 and 18, at least. But as it is, save for Philip's introduction, it feels like a filler series, even if it had my favorite ever episode of the show. The next series is what really made the fandom happy, but I will get to it soon enough. But for now, let's end this episode of Sodorama on a positive note, and show a clip from that favorite episode of mine, shall we?
Oh, Emily, you're my hero.
Boy, 2016 was a pretty rough year, wasn't it? The celebrity death toll of the year made 2016 more depressing than perhaps it deserved to be, and that's not even getting into other rough patches we went through during that time. Batman vs. Superman just didn't take off, the world of politics became a landmine in debates in America, no thanks to some ill-tempered Biff Tannen lookalike from New York, and the Thomas fandom was feeling very nervous during that time when their minds were on the Little Blue Tank Engine and his friends. 2016 marked the release of Thomas and the Great Railway Show, the musical, or as most of you would call it, The Great Race, and reception towards it was divisive, to say the least. Some loved it, some hated it, others were somewhere in the middle. Considering how big Soda's Legend of the Lost Treasure was in terms of scope, many were hoping that Andrew Brenner could outdo himself once again. But he didn't. The story was very low stakes compared to last year's special, and introduced a bunch of characters that would not appear again in the show until the Big World Big Adventures revamp. Well, half of them at least. Along with Series 19 not living up to the expectations of the two series prior, as well as many were hoping, fans believed that we were about to enter another dark age. Thankfully, Series 20 came along to prove that wasn't the case, because they weren't all out for this series. I don't even know where to begin. Actually, I think I do. After 20 years of not appearing on television, barring a cameo in Calling All Engines and a surprise reappearance in Soda's Legend of a Lost Treasure, Daisy the Diesel Railcar finally returned to the show full-time. She is practically the MVP for both Series 20 and 21, which I'll cover next time. I can almost remember watching the railcar in the coaches for the first time and being endeared with Tracy Ann Overman's performance as a sassy railcar herself. She is perfect casting, and I couldn't ask for a better voice for Daisy, who I'd very much consider the best Audrey created character. I almost want to do an individual review talking about Daisy. She's that great a character. That being said, I don't think she'd have been that great a character if she hadn't been paired up with Ryan the Purple Tank Engine. He's one of the best characters to come from the Brenner era. He's very kind-hearted and willing to help, but he's also a bit gullible and naive. I mean, Ryan and Daisy pretty much shows him to be a bit of a pushover, needing to stand up for himself. He was originally going to be depicted as overconfident and dismissive, but with the episodes we got, I'm kind of glad I didn't go for that, because two characters playing off against one another with similar personalities just wouldn't have been that interesting. The only other non-Audrey newbie from Lost Treasure was Skiff the Railboat. The poor guy was very sweet and optimistic in the special, and you couldn't help but feel sorry for him when Sailor John abused him, and you feel happy for him when he's freed from John's sinister grip. You just want to give the little guy a hug, and Jamie Campbell Bower's performance simply completes the character. The last of the Lost Treasure newbies technically aren't new characters, but they are at least new to the show itself. For the first time since Series 4, we got characters pulled out from the Railway series with Rex, Bert, and Mike, or as I collectively called them, the Arsdale Trio. They were really good for the small roles they had in Lost Treasure, but in their episodes in Series 20, they're a riot. The Northwestern Railway has a wide variety of personalities. The Scarloy Railway, barring Duncan on occasion, has mostly nice guys, while the Arsdale Trio thrive by being jerks to one another, yet they still look out for one another in the end, making it for one of the strongest dynamics of the entire show. I don't think I have anything left to say about the Arsdale trilogy that hasn't been said already. Okay, I'll say one thing though. Had they been produced during the model series somehow, they probably wouldn't have turned out as great, but wouldn't it have been funny just hearing George Carlin shout tit for tat, tit for tat?
Yes! They finally brought back in my beautiful boys!
What the... Cam, what are you doing here?
Sorry, Zack. I heard you mentioning the small Arsdale Railway engines and I just couldn't resist. Do you have any idea how long it's been since we last saw them? Like, forever ago?
Well, yeah, but I would appreciate it if you didn't suddenly jump in like that.
Sorry, Zack, but I just got to have my say about them too. I got my own words about them right here. The highlighted bits are the best parts.
They're all highlighted, Cam.
Exactly. Just let me have my say and then I'll get out of your way.
Fine, go nuts, Cam.
Thank you. Seeing as how they reintroduced the little guys back into the series since their last appearance in the Railway series, I'd give Brenner a good thumbs up for bringing those little guys to life on the CGI for the very first time in ages. Sure, they couldn't have given them an appearance in the classic TV series due to their small size, not to mention that the modelling for them would prove difficult. But that's not the only thing that made their arc golden, but the drivers had finally been given dialogue and speaking roles as well, which in the end, that pretty much displays good character design throughout that arc. You see, this is the kind of character design that the CGI series needed so much more of. A Thomas plot where most drivers and firemen have their fair share of dialogue, as well as to help drive an episode plot home. So, all in all, I'd praise Andrew Brenner for bringing back our favourite trio that we thought to have long been forgotten.
If you're done, can I please continue this review without you interrupting?
Okay, fine. I've had my say about them. I'm off to make a new Surgery and Story saga anyway. Toodles!
Ugh, finally. Now, let's move on to the newbies from The Adventure Begins. The original Breakdown Train, after being absent from series 13 to 19 for whatever reason, finally returns to the show in form of Judy and Jerome. I was pretty wild about the missing Breakdown Train when it first came out on Extraordinary Engines, but since then, looking back, it's a bit on the dull side, but I still like the episode, and it's nice that Judy and Jerome finally have a proper role in the series rather than constantly relying on Rocky for rescues. Same thing applies to Glenn the Coffee Pot Engine. His small part in The Adventure Begins did very little for me. He appears in the last scene of the special, says a few lines. That was very much it. With the mindset that the coffee pots were all scrapped by the early 50s, it seemed as though we'd never get anything out of Glenn. But thankfully, the Christmas Coffee Pot and Over the Hill proved otherwise. And now Glenn is one of the most charismatic, entertaining characters of the show. It helps that he was paired up with Steven, and these two old-timers are the solar equivalent to Statler and Waldorf.
Hey, they aren't half bad. Nope, they're all bad.
Finally, let's get to the newbies for Series 20. First of which is Bradford the Brake Van, or as I should say, Battery Sergeant Major Williams on rails.
Oh dear, outside, never mind.
Bradford is such an over-the-top character with his equally over-the-top military-like mannerisms that when he's first introduced, he doesn't seem like that. But the moment he's coupled up to Thomas's trucks...
Right, you horrible lot! I'm in charge now! So no bumping and none of you a cheek!
But we like bumping!
Not on my watch, matey. This is now a bump-free zone. Oh dear, outside, never mind.
He said it! He said it!
Pairing him up with Samson was a great idea, given the Cabless Tank Engine's record for foolishness, but it wouldn't be fully realized until Samson and the Fireworks in Series 22. Bradford wouldn't have turned out so brilliantly had it not been for Rob Rackstraw's vocal performance. That guy has a great vocal range, and he's one of the best voice actors that the show has ever had since first voicing James in The Adventure Begins. Seriously, this guy could rival Keith Wickham as far as how prolific his range is. He's that talented. Speaking of Rob Rackstraw, there's his least popular character, Hugo the Rail Zeppelin, or as Mike calls him,
Herr Silberwurst.
I've never been a fan of him as a character, and the 2 episodes he got didn't do him any justice at all. He's kind-hearted and sensitive, and that's literally it. And Hugo didn't appear in any series since, barring a cameo appearance in I Wanna Go Home from Journey Beyond Sodor, for some reason. I'd say it's a relief, but it's a shame too. Had Big World Big Adventures been allowed to continue, and if there had been some story set in Germany, perhaps Hugo could have had a chance to properly shine as a character. Same thing with Frida. what can be said about the episodes? There are so many great ones that they could practically make Series 20 great on their own. I mean, there are a lot of gems here. The Arsdale Trilogy, Love Me Tender, Ryan and Daisy, Henry Gets the Express, Over the Hill, The Railcar and the Coaches, All in Vain, and I'm gonna say it, The Way She Does It, and Diesel and the Ducklings. The former is a Miller script done right and...
What did you say, punk?
What's this? Gang up on Zack whenever he dishes out a hot take day? First Matt, now you, Mike.
I'm sorry, but you cannot be serious. That episode is very reminiscent of a Miller script, in that it is extremely bad. Daisy came off as an insufferable idiot, the Missy Allen joke was stupid and unfunny, and the truck that was carrying the puppet van was not a parcel van, you guys. I didn't want to go off on this tangent, but I can think of very few episodes from this entire 24-season run that irritate me like this one. The fact that it came from this season of all seasons. Just why? This episode has the same problems as Saving Time and Pally James, and yet this gets a free pass because... come to think of it, remember when this episode first aired in Canada? Coincidentally or not, this episode was incorrectly credited to Andrew Brenner, who wrote both those episodes. I know Brenner's episodes during that time weren't the best either, but come on guys, don't drag Brenner into this. Even in season 20 he deserved better than this. But you know what guys? I get it. I get why there are people who would like this one. It's because many of them were excited about Daisy's return from Legend of the Lost Treasure, especially after 20-odd years of absence prior to that special. While I too liked most of her episodes, this is Daisy at her absolute worst, bar none.
Alright, we get it. You don't like this episode. Stop bringing it up and stop bitching about it.
Hey, you brought it up, not me.
Wait, Fine, you got me. Now, can you please go so I can continue?
Fine. As long as we never speak of this episode again from here on out, except for in passing.
Fair enough. Now where was I? Oh yeah, Diesel and the Ducklings just sees Diesel's character continue to grow, and it had a good message about toxic masculinity, though given how little Donald and Douglas have appeared in the CGI series, I feel the episode could have worked a bit better with them playing off against Diesel, especially since Donald befriended a duck himself back in Series 3. Their lead role for this series, Love Me Tender, was great though, and the best of his series, but since then, they haven't done a whole lot, save for one episode which we'll cover next time. With all that being said, just what is it with the writers pointing out problems with the Thomas fandom? Not a criticism, just a humorous little observation. But of course, not every episode hit its target. The 2 Hugo episodes were pretty bad, as I mentioned, with Engine of the Future showing just how xenophobic the Steam Team could be at their worst. Even Edward, and that is a huge problem with them as a core group. At worst, they're all written interchangeably, and they lack anything that made them individual or complex. Saving Time was really dull and makes Samson a bigger idiot than he already was after Series 18. Pouty James simply flanderized the Red Engine to how he was in Series 1, only more annoying as if vanity was his only personality trait. And then there's Free Steam Engine's Gruff. I've always despised that episode as it destroyed Percy's character growth beginning with Tale the Brave and reverted Toby's to the one we despise in the likes of Toby and the Whistling Woods. Seriously, Andrew Brenner, what went wrong, man? You had a good start with Series 17, got better with Series 18, but then you put out the other side of the mountain for Series 19, and now your writing just seemed to bottom out with Series 20, the Arsdale Trilogy notwithstanding. Maybe he simply had too much to do behind the scenes, which is why he had little writing input for the next Free series, or he was just starting work on another children's show, Pablo. Nobody knows what went wrong with him, but either way, Brenner seemed to have lost his touch with Series 20. For the behind the scenes, Cautious Connor was intended to become part of Series 21, while Hasty Hannah would be in Series 20. However, both episodes ended up swapping series. Cautious Connor, All in Vain, and the Arsdale Trilogy were all left incomplete when Art Productions went bankrupt in August 2016, and they were later finished off by Jamfield Entertainment, known for producing shows like The Loud House and DC Superhero Girls. Beginning with Journey Beyond Sodor and Series 21, Jamfield would do the animation full-time. Interestingly, the Glenn duology did not end up on the complete Series 20 DVD, which makes the title pretty ironic. Instead, they end up being part of Series 21, and who knows when that'll come out on DVD, if at all. To be fair, Glenn didn't appear in any other episode on Series 20, and given that it was 28 episodes long and Series 21 just 18, it seems kinda fair. That being said, they haven't really addressed the Earl's Rally Museum in any episode since Over the Hill, and it's almost like Mattel have completely forgotten about that plot thread altogether, likely because of... but I won't say anything until we get there. 7 episodes out of Series 20 were produced by Robert Anderson, with the first 4 on the list being produced in 2015, with the rest being produced in 2016. The remaining episodes were produced by Tracy Blagden, while Anderson would depart from the show along with executive producer Colin Kagan and art director Boris Andreev. Head of production for hit Karen Davidson would also join them in leaving the show. Series 20 was the last to air on PBS, with distribution rights later going to Nickelodeon, which was a big mistake since that network is known for abusing their creators and shows more often than not, regardless of quality, so yeah, you can guess that it didn't go well at all. Mattel would later terminate their partnership with Nickelodeon and then make a deal with Netflix to stream Series 23 and 24 in the United States, though I kinda wish they had brought the first 22 onto Netflix there too. Series 20 was also the last to be produced by Hit Entertainment, with Mattel Creations taking over full-time for the next 4 series. But you know what? Series 20 was intended to be the last series, period. I mean, you may as well go on a high note, right? With 3 episodes being adapted from the books for the first time in 2 decades, it seems like a good place to stop. But then Ian McHugh made a deal with Mattel to keep the show going as long as Team Thomas were allowed to do so, and that in itself came with a bit of a price, which, again, we'll get to soon enough. I don't know about everyone else, but I feel like there's a bit of a curse going on with Thomas series that are divisible by 5. Series 5 marked the beginning of Thomas's downfall because Britt Allcroft was incredibly big-headed into thinking she'd do better than the Audreys. Don't try to convince me otherwise. Series 10 was incredibly boring and tedious to sit through with the models showing their age, and the less said about Series 15, the better. For all the issues I brought up, Series 20 manages to avoid that curse. Mostly. The writing for the show had never been better since the switch over to CGI for the most part, and it really did look like the show was in good hands. I would rank this series much higher had it not been for the stinkers, but as it is for the moment, it's at least in my personal top 5, but only just. There's only 4 series left to cover, so we'll see if that rings true by the end of it, though I doubt my top and bottom 5 will change that much.
But it did happen, didn't it?
With Series 20 finally resolving some loose ends from Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure and The Adventure Begins, not to mention the first Railway series adaptations in over 20 years, the fanbase was once again feeling positive about the show's future. Well, for a short while at least. Because when the first trailer to 2017's Journey Beyond Sodor dropped, it splintered an already fickle fanbase into a million pieces. Mainly because the engines were rebuilt on their chassis, which, frankly, is not that big a deal. It never bothered me much back then, and it still doesn't bother me now. I've seen far worse things, and I'm not even gonna talk about them for this review series, for the sake of my sanity and because they're not really relevant to the conversation. Anyway, when Journey Beyond Sodor finally came out in August, people were again greatly divided, but I don't think near as much as The Great Race did. It had a much stronger story and characters, but one thing I think most people agreed upon was that the texturing was a bit flat, most likely due to a month in the production schedule being lost, so they had to work with what they had. Then came Series 21, and out of the 5 series in the Brenner era, it's an interesting one to say the least. Out of them, Andrew Brenner didn't pen a single episode for this series. Whether it was due to writer's burnout, writing for Journey Beyond Sodor and or Big World Big Adventures, and not to mention working on Pablo, I don't know. He penned only 2 episodes for Series 22 and no episodes for Series 23, and after that, he left the show altogether. Not only that, Series 21 is the shortest ever with just 18 episodes. If we include the Jack in the Pack spin-off, then it's the second shortest. 26 episodes were planned, but according to Sodor Island forums, because The Adventure Begins had been fast-tracked into ARC's production schedule, this resulted in the production of both Series 19 and 20 being delayed, and on top of prioritizing the development towards Big World Big Adventures, this meant that 8 episodes out of Series 21 got sent to the scrap heap. We can only speculate what was planned for Series 21 had the reformat not taken place. But does less episodes equate to this series being inferior to Series 17 to 20? Not at all, because there are indeed hides that would be considered some of the best ever. Springtime for Diesel, Runaway Engine, Dowager Hat's Busy Day, Terrence Breaks the Ice, Daisy's Perfect Christmas, Unscheduled Stops, The Fastest Red Engine on Sodor. And speaking of that episode, it was the one in which Rosie was revealed to be in a new red coat of paint after being briefly hinted at in Hasty Hannah, as well as a small 20-second cameo in Journey Beyond Sodor. When a promo image of her with the Steam Team barring Edward and Toby was revealed in January 2017, the reaction was pretty explosive, with more supporters than detractors, with some even going so far as to say it ruined the show, to which I say, that's bullshit. I'm not going to go too far in that topic, but to those who are still against this makeover, I have this to say, and I'm sorry. It's been 4 years already, so get over yourselves. Maybe that's the wrong thing for me to say, but it's been long enough already. I think this makeover was something Rosie needed in order to be relevant again, especially since she barely did anything throughout Series 13 to 19, Series 20 notwithstanding, likely because they were reworking her render at the time. In fact, one of the scrapped episodes was about Rosie getting her repaint, so who knows how that could have gone. She did get one episode, however, in Series 22, and that one led to an even bigger explosion, but I'll come to that next time. The other confirmed scrapped episode was going to be about Bulgy the Bus, who is probably the most left-field, unexpected returnee since Harvey in Thomas's Shortcut, and once again, he was back to his anti-railways after going through a heel-face turn in Bulgy Rides Again. With hindsight, that Series 7 episode just feels wildly out of place with his character. How do you go from hating railways to being amicable with them, and then wanting to take them down again? With that being said, Bulgy would eventually receive an episode to himself in Series 23 with Free the Roads. So who knows what the other 6 episodes could have been about? Could there have been some emphasis on the newbies from Journey Beyond Sodor? I mean, Merlin did reappear in Seeing is Believing, as did Beresford in Thomas and the Royal Engine, yet Theo, Lexi, Hurricane, and Frankie remained one-offs to this special only. Rather sad, really. The other returnee to this series, one we actually saw coming, was Terrence the Tractor, finally bringing the entire non-human cast of Series 1 in CGI. What I liked was that they gave Terrence a bit more character by making him a bit cocky, akin to his persona in Toby Takes the Road.
Adaptable, he boasted. That's what my owner says I am. Go anywhere, do anything, that's me. You take my advice and scrap your rails. Broaden your outlook, like me.
It also leads to a bit of clever irony when he forgets his own advice about being safe and sensible. Those are just a few of the highlights from Series 21. So what about the duds? Well, for a start, the Big Freeze was riddled with plot holes and contrivances, especially in the latter half, to make the diesel engines look good and the steam engines weak. I mean, how did the delivery of fuel tankers manage to make it through just fine, yet a train of coal trucks didn't? Wouldn't both have been of equal importance just to keep a railway running? Cranky at the end of the line and New Crane on the dock were just dull and unimaginative, and they do very little with Carly as a character. In fact, since then, she's added very little of value, with the possible exception of sending Thomas off on his big world adventure.
But why would it be okay to load Thomas onto a ship that was going to Africa, Carly?
Thomas told me that he asked you about it, sir. He said that you thought it was a good idea.
A good idea? What did I say was a good idea?
That Thomas be the first railway engine to go right around the world?
Considering that Brenham is a bit overpopulated, wouldn't it have made better sense to have Carly working at Arlesburg? I mean, the line must have seen a huge boom in traffic since the Horrick extension, so wouldn't that have been more reasonable? There is more than one harbor on Sodor after all, but really, you could have dealt with Cranky and Carly's rivalry in one episode rather than 2, making it feel predictable and stretched out. Oh, and we also got this moment.
What?
So now you speak? You've been standing there silent all these years, Big Mickey, and you've never said a single word.
Well, you've never said a single word to me either.
Done purely for fan service, as if Tugs and Thomas were part of the same universe, and with the exception of Steam Team to the rescue, Big Mickey has done nothing of value since that reveal. You could cut it all together and nothing would be affected. Moving on. Lastly, there's Emily in the middle. I figured the only way to do it justice is to let Rachel talk about it.
finally! I've been waiting since Vote Today, Friend Tomorrow to have my say on this episode. Okay, this episode is definitely not the Brenner Era's best moment. In fact, to this day, I consider it the worst of the Brenner Era, and it's only beaten out by BWBA's episode Apology Impossible in terms of bad episodes. Why is that? Well, Donald and Douglas try to act like a pair of idiots throughout the entire episode. I get that siblings argue, but you'd think they wouldn't do that while on an important job, at least not in this fashion. And don't get me started on Douglas poking fun of the signal box incident, and vice versa when Donald did the same about the brake van. Guys, those incidents did you favors. Even without my headcanon of Donald smashing the signal box on purpose, by the way, full explanation of that for another time, folks, he still saved Douglas from being scrapped. And no, I'm not over-exaggerating. Listen to this line from Stubborn Hat.
I am disappointed, Donald. I didn't expect such clumsiness from you. I had decided to send Douglas back and keep you. I'm sorry, sir, said Donald. I should think so, too. You have upset my arrangements.
And as for Douglas smashing the brake van, well, I'm gonna let James take over.
That spiteful brake van, too, put in James. Good riddance, that's what I say.
Exactly, James. I just find this episode a big disgrace to Donald and Douglas's characters. Even Emily and Toby's antics didn't make the episode work for me. Okay, got that off my chest. Catch you on the flip side, Zach.
Thank you, Rachel. For all its gems and stinkers, Series 21 has a few divisive episodes, among them being Hasty Hannah, a Series 20 leftover. That episode is liked and disliked for a similar reason: Hannah's antics and how Toby reacts to them. He's usually more confident whenever Henrietta is around, so it's kind of understandable that he'd be a bit more reserved around someone as loud and brash as Hannah. Though Toby could have done a bit more to stand up to her and hold his ground. I find Hannah to be a more entertaining character than Carly, because even in the 2 episodes she appeared in, it really feels like there was a lot more he could have done with making her Toby's second coach. Sure, there's Victoria from the books, but she hadn't really done a whole lot. Not helping is that a furnace railway coach would look out of place among some Great Eastern stock, and that she was introduced in the penultimate Railway series book. So seeing Toby and Henrietta both resisting Hannah's adrenaline junkie-like persona and trying to get her to stop and smell the roses would have been interesting to see. There's also one other divisive episode among the fandom, but I'll come to that in a bit. Prior to their bankruptcy, Arc Productions completed the first 7 episodes of Series 21 as well as Terrence Breaks the Ice. From this series on, Jamfield takes over the animation full time. The show even celebrated its 500th episode with PA problems. With Series 24 over, there have been 584 episodes, or to put it more accurately, 578 episodes and 6 mini-specials. If we include the pack episodes and consider the mini-specials as episodes, then the show's run is 597 episodes, just shy of 600 if you exclude the cancelled episodes. For both Series 21 and 22, Michaela Winter was producer taking over for Ian McHugh. He would take over the role once more following Winter's departure. Series 21 also marks the last one with Mark Morahan as narrator. As I mentioned with Series 17, he's still involved in some capacity with Thomas and Friends Storytime, as well as voicing Dexter the coach in School of Duck. Although his tenure was not as long as Michelangelo's,
his name's Nigel.
Mark's tenure as narrator is one to be respected for sure. For the next 3 series, Thomas takes over as the narrator, voiced by Joseph May for America and John Hasler for the United Kingdom. Alright, so now that I've gotten the rest of Series 21 out of the way, we can finally talk about what many of you have been waiting for me to deliver my thoughts on. But first...
Perhaps I could stay one more night with Philip, if that's all right with you, sir.
You can stay as long as you like. Forever, even.
Well, it is nearer my branch line.
Well, Edward, if you want to move to Wellsworth, that's fine by me.
It's fine. It'll be fine. You know what? I'm okay with this.
So, where do I begin with this? Well...
Can I just say that this was the point where...
Sit down, Matt, you fat mother...
Dude, are you okay?
What did you just say?
I said...
Hey, Vicka, be Jesus, Zack, what was all that about?
Wow, I've never heard that kind of use of profanity in all my life. That's kind of too much, even for me.
Sorry, but maybe if I wasn't interrupted so constantly by Short Stack over here, I wouldn't have needed to blow my stack, if the shoe fits.
Well, if you think the shoe fits, Zack, why don't you turn around and bend over so I can show you where it fits?
That's enough, you guys. Matt, go and take a walk. Zack, proceed with what you were going to say.
Alright, so as I was about to say, a shed for Edward marked the Blue Engine's departure from Titmuth Sheds, and oh my god, did it lead to the biggest divide in the fandom since ever. Many, and I mean many, people treated this as if it was a life or death situation, even going so far as to say it was the beginning of the end for the show, some people even going as far as to say it was the end, period. And my reaction to that is, really? In a show where we've had firefighters acting stupid, this is the worst thing ever? Not even close. If you take a step back and think about it, Edward barely works as a leading character. Hell, in a lot of episodes from the classic era, he was very much a supporting character. Cows, for example, was about Henry and Gordon bragging about not letting cows get the better of him, only for the pair to encounter a cow on the bridge, and Edward makes a wisecrack about it. Old Iron was about James getting annoyed with Edward being late and becoming a runaway the following day, resulting in Edward coming to his rescue. The only episode in which Edward was actually the main character was Edward's Exploit, and that was about him trying to overcome being crippled by a damaged crank pin. And those are just the ones I can name off the top of my head. Every time Edward got a starring role in series 8 through 16, he was basically Edward in name alone. His personality was altered so that he didn't feel like the Edward we knew and loved. Edward in the male makes him come off as a cowardly idiot. Charlie and Eddie had him bow easily to peer pressure and he got scolded for the crap Charlie caused, and the less said about Edward strikes out, the better. Even in the Brenner era, whenever Edward had starring roles, he was predominantly a side character. Even in Old Reliable Edward, it was more about bringing Gordon down a peg. PA Problems in this series was about Sir Topham Hatt feeling overconfident about his new public address system, only for it to turn out faulty. A Shed for Edward is the only episode throughout all of series 17 to 21 in which he's actually the main character, and that was about him leaving the main cast, which was the best thing to ever happen to him. And no, I'm not being sarcastic. With Edward out of the Steam Team, a concept which was non-existent and should have been done away with by this point, that meant that he would never be poorly characterized again, if the likes of Hunt the Truck are anything to go by. That being said, the fact that he and Henry had their roles reduced to that extent in Big World Big Adventures was pretty dumb. They deserved to be major supporting characters in that era. At least Toby had a couple of episodes dedicated to him, even when he wasn't part of the Steam Team anymore. Oh, and before you complain about Edward and Henry lacking starring roles in series 22 to 24, keep in mind that neither of them had a starring role in the Railway series since the 1990s, so consider yourselves thankful that they appeared in those three series at all. But getting back to A Shed for Edward, him moving to Wellsworth was the right thing to do with him since, as he stated himself, it is closer to his branch line. Plus, with mentoring Philip, it really feels like this generation's Thomas and Edward. It makes sense for Edward to mentor a much younger engine like Philip. We should have seen this coming from a mile away back in series 19, like I said. It didn't come from nowhere, folks. If anything, it was very clever, subtle foreshadowing. Makes little moments like that more important than they would have been back then. And since Edward was the first friend Thomas made upon his arrival to Sodor, it made sense that he would be the one to say goodbye first.
We'll miss you here at the Sheds, Edward.
I'm sure we'll see each other all the time.
You can be emotional when friends move away, and that's perfectly fine, but you can also feel excited about making new friends and wondering about what lies ahead for you in the future. It's a natural part of life, you know. In all honesty, I'm not that bothered about the engines changing the subject because they know they'll still see Edward no matter what. After all, there are more important things than just moping about the fact a friend moved away. It shows how strong the engines are on the inside. Except for Gordon, of course, but that's another story. Look, I get that people would be upset over Edward leaving the Steam Team. He was, after all, the first character introduced in the Railway series, and therefore, he's Audrey's most iconic character. But just because Edward was the first character introduced in the franchise, that doesn't automatically make him the greatest thing since Welsh Coal, and no, that does not automatically make me an Edward hater. I still respect the Old Iron as much as the next guy, but I still think there have been much better characters after him. If Edward truly was the best character in the entire franchise simply because he was the first to be created, by that logic, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs would be a far greater animated Disney feature than The Lion King, Fantasia, Wreck-It Ralph, The Nightmare Before Christmas, 101 Dalmatians, the Toy Story series, Tangled, Finding Nemo, Aladdin, The Little Mermaid, Lady and the Tramp, Inside Out, Beauty and the Beast, Big Hero 6, The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, The Incredibles, Frozen, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Meet the Robinsons, and Zootopia. Could anyone really picture Snow White being ranked better than all the above movies on the pure basis that it was Disney's first ever animated movie? That's not to say I think Edward is a bad character. Quite the opposite, in fact. He's a character that I respect more than I love, and at the very least, he'd be top 25 material, but not in the top 10. If a show ended with a shed for Edward, I'd be okay with that. After all, his very first episode was about wanting to get out of the sheds and be useful, so it feels like they've gone full circle here. What else can you do except start a new one? So is a shed for Edward really worth the controversy? I don't think so. Again, I understand why fans would get upset over it, but I believe it's for the best. To an extension anyway. I really wish I could go on, but I feel I should wrap things up, but I'm not ruling out the possibility of a follow-up review. We'll see. As for Series 21 as a whole, this is going to surprise a lot of you, I'm sure, but Series 21 is my favorite CGI series, not just of the Brenner era, but the CGI series as a whole, period. In fact, I now rank it as the second best series so far, only behind Series 2. Apologies to Series 20, but the bad episodes under its belt mean that it's now just shy of hitting the top 5 best. You see, everyone's got that one series of a show, any show, that's personal to them, whether it's for nostalgic reasons or for sentimental reasons. So if you want to know why Series 21 is so special to me, let me take you back to 2017. At that point, I was moving house from California to Oregon, and I had transitioned from one college to another. We'd already put out our first episode of Emotions Corner, and the next one wouldn't come out till October. Looking back, America was already on a bit of a downward path, thanks a lot, President Biff. And even before the COVID pandemic, watching something like Wonder Woman or My Little Pony the movie felt like a form of escapism. It was very much the same thing for Thomas's 21st season and My Little Pony's 7th. Watching either of them helped me to forget about what was happening in the real world and to get away from my worries for even a minute. And looking at what the future lay ahead for the brand, my feelings for Series 21 hold up now like they did back in 2017, perhaps even stronger. Yes, Series 21 has a few duds, Emily in the Middle immediately springs to mind, but I feel the gems it had more than made up for them, and I feel like it did maintain its quality for the first 4 series that preceded it. It's a miracle that this series came out at all, considering all the crap it went through just to get Big Old Big Adventures off the ground. Series 21 is the last great series of Thomas and Friends, and it's one that I'll always have a special place in my heart for because it helped me overcome a life-changing year. Yes, it's a shame that it was cut short, and I get why fans would rank it lower for that reason alone, but really, it's quality over quantity that truly matters. And for me, it was those moments of escapism and reassurance that really helped its position on my list. And with 3 series to go, I don't see my top 5 favorite series changing anytime soon. I feel this line from Daisy's Perfect Christmas sums everything up.
Maybe it wasn't better or worse than usual, just different. Today wasn't perfect like it used to be. It was a new kind of perfect.
That right there is a line that holds up just as strongly now as it did back then, or maybe more. Alright, so that does it for the Brenner era. I'm gonna go out and say that it's the best era of the show, just barely edging out above the classic era. My one reason for that is that the Brenner era relied a lot more on the strength of the characters to help tell its stories. As good as the first 7 series are, the reliance on the narrator did hold them back a bit. Of course, like the classic era, the Brenner era was not without its share of duds, but more on that in a bit. Series 17 was something of a slow start, but it showed promise for changes to come. Series 18 built on that foundation and even improved on its predecessor's weak points. Series 19 was a real step down, however, but thankfully, Series 20 came along to pick things up again and brought out some of the show's greatest ever episodes, and Series 21 was where the show reached a new peak. I doubt that there will ever be another period of show like it, but which episodes from that era do I think were the best? There were so many good ones that it wasn't easy whittling it down to just 10, so this is what I come up with. Number 10, Thomas's Shortcut. Number 9, Thomas the Babysitter. Number 8, Dowager Hat's Busy Day. Number 7, Tit for Tat. Number 6, Duncan and the Grumpy Passenger. Number 5, Love Me Tender. Number 4, Daisy's Perfect Christmas. Number 3, Slow Steven. Number 2, A Shed for Edward. And number 1, Best Engine Ever. Now, picking out the worst episodes from the Brenner era wasn't that hard. Because so many great episodes came from that era alone, much like the classic era, the bad episodes tend to stick out a bit more. Had they ended up in series 8 through 16, the following 10 episodes would have likely gotten lost in the shuffle. Number 10, The Frozen Turntable. Number 9, Helping Hero. Number 8, Saving Time. Number 7, Samson Sent for Scrap. Number 6, Henry Spots Trouble. Number 5, Emily in the Middle. Number 4, The Other Side of the Mountain. Number 3, Engine of the Future. Number 2, Free Steam Engines Gruff. And number 1, Rocky Rescue. If you made it this far in the video, I congratulate you. I'll admit that it did go on a bit longer than I was intending, but anyway, that's 4 eras down, only 1 more to go. I'm Zack, you're watching Sodorama, and next time we'll be discussing the final era of the show as we knew it since 1984. Yep, we'll finally be taking a dive into the Big World Big Adventures era.
Huh?
That's what I said. The next set of episodes I'll be going over will be the ones from the Big World Big Adventures era. You and the others knew that from the get-go, Matt.
Oh, Actually, I think I'll let Mulaflaga say it for me.
Oh, shit!
Yeah, I hear you, Moo. This is not gonna be fun.
Oh, but it will be for me, Matt, once I've dealt with you.
Oh no, here we go again. If you need me, I'll be in my room playing Crash.
I'm getting the medical kit. Report to me on the damage, bro.
Wait, what do you mean? Zack, what are you?
For many years, we've slept by the side of our Northwestern family.